In the quiet suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, where the 1980s hummed with the promise of change, Sarah Thompson, built a life from threads and grit. For 40 years, I poured my soul into a textile business, its looms clattering day and night to keep our family afloat. My husband Daniel was a dreamer. His days were filled with the soft clack of his typewriter, and he chased the ghost of poetic greatness. While I balanced ledgers and negotiated with suppliers, he wove verses about love and loss, none of which paid the bills. Our small house on Maple Street smelled of fresh cotton and ink, a strange marriage of my labor and his dreams. I never minded not at first. In the 1980s, America was shifting, women were stepping into boardrooms, but in our town, many still saw a wife's role as the backbone of the home. I took pride in being that backbone, ensuring our daughter Ellie had clothes for school books for her curious mind and a roof over her head. Daniel's poetry readings at the local library drew small crowds, his voice rich with longing, and I'd sit in the back clapping louder than anyone. I believed in him, us, and the life we'd built together. But as the years stacked up, cracks formed. Daniel's dreams never turned into dollars, and the weight of our family's needs fell squarely on me. I'd rise before dawn, my hands calloused from handling bolts of fabric while he slept late, lost in his manuscripts. I told myself it was love, that sacrifice was noble, that my work gave him the freedom to create. But love, I learned, can be a one-way street, and mine was a lonely road. The truth hit hardest when Daniel lay on his deathbed, frail and fading in the sterile glow of Dayton General Hospital. He clutched a smooth river stone in his hand, its edges worn from years of touch. His lips cracked and trembling, whispered a name, Ava. Not Sarah, not his wife of 4 decades, but Ava, his college sweetheart from his days at Ohio State before our families arranged our marriage. I stood by his side, my heart a knot of confusion and pain, as he murmured her name again and again, the stone his only anchor. I might have let it go, chalked it up to delirium, but our daughter Ellie gave those whispers a life I couldn't ignore. At 16, she was her father's shadow, enchanted by his romanticism. After his death, she found his old journals filled with poems about Ava and turned their story into a book. She titled it The Stone of Unfinished Love, which spread like wildfire online, shared across early internet forums and local book clubs. Readers wept over the tale of Daniel the poet trapped in an arranged marriage, and Ava the love he lost to duty. Poor Daniel, they wrote, forced to spend his life with a woman he didn't love. Arranged marriages are a tragedy. Here's to Daniel and Ava reuniting in the next life. Ellie read these comments to me as I lay in my own hospital bed, recovering from a heart scare brought on by years of stress. Her voice was bright, oblivious to the knife each word drove into me. Mom, isn't it romantic? Dad and Ava were soulmates, but you had to be with him instead. You had a good life. I closed my eyes, the beeping monitors drowning out her voice. A good life. I'd given everything, my youth, my dreams, my health, to keep our family whole. Yet I was the footnote in their story, the practical wife who benefited from Daniel's sacrifice. Tears burned behind my lids, but I swallowed them. I'd cried enough in silence. The resentment choked me, a lifetime of being unseen pressing against my ribs. I'd always known about Ava, the girl Daniel met in his college literature classes, but I thought she was a faded memory, a relic of youth. Now I saw the truth. She'd lived in his heart all along, her name etched deeper than mine. As my heart monitor spiked, I felt myself slipping, the weight of betrayal too heavy to bear. The world went dark, and I thought that was the end. But here's where the story turns, and I hope you're with me because this journey's worth sharing. If it moves, you hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to follow the rest of my tale. It's one of heartbreak, but also of finding light in the ashes. I woke up not in a hospital bed, but in our old house, the radio blasting Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun. It was 1982 when a buyer came to negotiate for my textile business. My hands trembled as I touched my face, smooth, 30 years old again. The calendar on the wall confirmed it. I'd been reborn, given a second chance to rewrite my life. I sat at the kitchen table, the buyer's contract before me, and a strange clarity settled in. This wasn't just a fluke, but a cosmic gift, a chance to right the wrongs of a life spent serving others. I thought of the women I'd read about in magazines, Gloria Steinem, Oprah Winfrey, carving their paths in this new decade. If they could, so could I. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, Ellie's dismissal, and those internet comments still stung, but they also lit a fire. I wouldn't be the unsung hero of someone else's story again. This time, I'd live for Sarah. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of our Dayton home, casting patterns on the worn linoleum floor. The radio crackled with Madonna's Lucky Star, a fitting anthem for the impossible moment I was living. Sarah Thompson was 30 again, my body free of the aches that had plagued my 60s in that other life. My mind, though, carried the weight of 40 years, every late night at the textile business, every dollar stretched to cover Ellie's school supplies, every poem Daniel wrote while I paid the electric bill. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter's edge, the buyer's contract for my business spread out before me. This was no dream. I'd been reborn, and I needed to understand why. I closed my eyes, searching for answers. In my past life, I'd died in despair, my heart broken by Daniel's obsession with Ava and Ellie's blind adoration of her father. Perhaps the universe or some higher force had seen my sacrifice and deemed it unfair. Maybe it was my unresolved regret, a soul's plea for a do-over. Whatever the reason, I felt a purpose burning to reclaim the dreams I'd buried under duty. The 1980s were a time of reinvention in America. Women were launching businesses, defying expectations, and I was part of that tide, ready to ride it to a new shore. I opened my eyes and caught sight of Daniel in the backyard, his lanky frame bent toward 9-year-old Ellie. He held the river stone, its smooth surface glinting in the sunlight, and spun a story about love and adventure. Ellie's eyes sparkled, her small hands clutching the stone like a treasure. I knew that stone's story too well, Ava's farewell gift from their college days, a symbol of the love Daniel never let go. I'd brushed it off as a harmless memento in my past life. Youthful romance, I told myself, couldn't compete with the life we'd built. But on his deathbed, that stone was his lifeline, not me. I approached the window, watching Ellie giggle as Daniel recited a poem. She was like him, her dark curls and dreamy eyes mirroring his own. But beneath her innocence, I saw the seeds of the girl who'd later dismiss me, who'd read those cruel comments as I lay dying, calling me the beneficiary of her father's sacrifice. Even now at 9, she worshipped Daniel's ideals, blind to the labor that kept her fed. I wondered what shaped her, his stories, or my absence always working late. I wanted to reach out to show her I was more than the businesswoman she'd later mock, but the sting of her future betrayal held me back. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Mr. Harrison, the buyer, his briefcase stuffed with papers. He told Mrs. Thompson that sliding the contract across the table was a fair offer. $200,000 for the textile business plus 5% of monthly profits. If that's not enough, I'll add $20,000. I'd rejected this deal in my past life, clinging to the business as my family's lifeline. I'd spent decades expanding it from a small workshop to a thriving operation, all while Daniel wrote poetry that never sold and Ellie dreamed of carrying his legacy. That choice had chained me to a life of sacrifice. This time I hesitated, my pen hovering over the contract. Selling meant freedom, but it also meant letting go of the identity I'd built. The textile business was my creation, born from late nights sketching designs I never had time to sew. I'd dreamed of being a designer, not just a manager. Family came first. Now, with a second chance, I imagined a life where my talents shone, maybe in New York, where fashion was booming alongside Wall Street. The 1980s were electric with possibilities. Women broke into industries once closed to them. I could be one of them. I thought of the letters I'd found after Daniel's death, hidden in his desk drawer. They spanned our entire marriage. Ava signed each one. He'd written to her for 40 years, even after we'd said our vows. With a twist in my gut, I realized that Ellie's name was a nod to her Ava plus lie for family. Every time I called my daughter, I'd been echoing the woman who held his heart. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was Ellie's too, for romanticizing their story while erasing mine. I pressed the pen to paper and wrote "deal closed." The words felt like a key turning in a lock. I wouldn't carry their dreams anymore. Daniel could chase his poetry, Ellie her father's ideals, but I'd build something for myself. The business had been my cage, but its sail would be my wings. I looked at Daniel and Ellie, still lost in their story, the river stone passing between them. They didn't see me, not really, but soon they'd feel my absence. Mr. Harrison smiled, shaking my hand. "You're making the right choice, Sarah. This could open new doors." I nodded, my mind racing to New York, to a life where I wasn't just the wife who paid the bills. The 1980s were a new frontier, and I was ready to claim it. Daniel's stone might hold his heart, but I'd forge my path one stitch at a time. The backyard of our Dayton, Ohio home was a patchwork of dandelions and dreams, where the summer of 1982 stretched long and lazy. I stood at the kitchen window, the contract to sell my textile business still warm in my hands, its ink a promise of freedom. Outside, Daniel knelt beside 9-year-old Ellie, his voice a soft cadence as he spun a tale about a poet and a river stone. The smooth and heart-shaped stone glinted in his palm, a relic from Ava, his college sweetheart. Ellie's eyes, so like her father's, sparkled with wonder as she clutched it, her small fingers tracing its edges. To her it was a treasure. To me, it was a wound reopened. In my past life, I'd seen that stone countless times tucked in Daniel's pocket or resting on his desk. I'd dismissed it as a harmless keepsake, a fragment of youth before our arranged marriage bound us. Everyone had old flames, I reasoned, and ours was a practical love built on shared responsibilities. But on his deathbed, when he whispered Ava's name and gripped that stone, I understood it wasn't just a memory. It was his heart held captive by a love that never faded, while I, his wife of 40 years, was a footnote. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd admitted, and now reborn in 1982, I saw it for what it was, a theft of my devotion. I pressed my hand against the window, the glass cool against my skin. The 1980s were a turning point in America. Women were storming workplaces from corporate offices to fashion houses, their voices rising in a world that still expected them to cook dinner and mend socks. I'd read about designers like Donna Karan building empires in New York and felt a pang of envy. I'd once sketched dresses in the margins of my ledgers, dreaming of creations that could grace runways, not just factory floors. But duty had buried those dreams, tying me to a business that fed Daniel's poetry and Ellie's education. Now, with a second chance, I could unearth them. Ellie's laughter broke my thoughts. "Tell me more, Dad," she chirped, hugging the stone. Daniel's smile was tender, but it didn't reach me. He never looked at me that way, not in this life or the last. I wondered what Ellie saw in him, a hero, a storyteller untouched by the grind of bills and budgets. She was only 9, but already she mirrored his romanticism, blind to the labor that kept our fridge stocked. In my past life, she'd grown into a teenager who idolized her father, publishing his and Ava's love story, while I lay dying, dismissed as the practical wife who got Daniel. The memory stung, but I searched her face for something else, a flicker of doubt, a need for me. Did she ever notice my absence working late to pay for her art classes? I stepped outside, the grass soft under my sneakers. Daniel glanced up, his eyes briefly meeting mine before returning to Ellie. And then, the poet crossed the river. He continued, holding the stone to guide him. I wanted to interrupt to ask if he'd ever tell a story about me, about the woman who built a business from a single sewing machine, who kept our family whole while he chased metaphors. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I saw myself in Ellie, raised to value dreams over reality, poetry over paychecks. I'd enabled that, pouring my energy into their world while starving myself. The air felt heavy with the weight of 2 lifetimes. In my past life, I'd found Ava's letters after Daniel's death hidden in his desk, each a confession of his undying love. They spanned our entire marriage, 40 years of secret longing, even as we raised Ellie and shared a bed. Ellie's name, I realized too late, was a tribute to Ava plus, lie for family. Every time I called her, I'd unknowingly honored his first love. The betrayal wasn't just Daniel's, it was Ellie's too, for romanticizing their story while erasing mine. I'd been their anchor, yet they saw me as a means to an end, a woman who dealt in dollars, not dreams. I turned back to the house, my resolve hardening. The 1980s were a new dawn, with women rewriting the rules. I thought of the women's marches I'd read about, the Equal Rights Amendment debates, still simmering, pushing for equality in a world that often saw us as secondary. I'd spent my first life conforming, playing the dutiful wife in a town where tradition lingered. Now I'd break free. Selling the business was just the start. I'd leave Dayton and head to New York, where the fashion industry was booming. I could design, create, and be more than the shadow behind Daniel's poetry. Ellie's voice drifted over. Dad was the poet's love, like yours and Ava's. My heart lurched. She knew about Ava even at 9, fed by Daniel's stories. I waited for his response, hoping for a shred of loyalty. He chuckled softly. "Let's keep that between us, Ellie. Your mom might not understand." The words were a quiet knife slicing through the illusion of our family. I wasn't their confidant, the practical outsider who didn't get their romantic souls. I walked back inside, my hands trembling, not with tears, but with purpose. The contract on the table was my ticket out. I'd given 40 years to a man who loved another, a daughter who'd later betray me. This time I'd choose myself. The Riverstone could keep Daniel's heart. I'd forge my path where my dreams weren't just sketches in the margins. The kitchen table in our Dayton home was cluttered with invoices and fabric swatches, remnants of a life I was about to leave behind. The contract to sell my textile business sat at the center, its pages crisp with possibility. Mr. Harrison, the buyer, had called earlier, confirming his offer $200,000 plus 5% of monthly profits. If that's not enough, I'll add $20,000, he'd said, his voice eager over the crackling phone line. I'd turned him down in my past life, clinging to the business as our family's lifeline. I'd spent decades scaling it from a small workshop to a factory employing dozens, all to fund Daniel's poetry and Ellie's dreams. That choice had cost me my own. Now reborn in 1982, I saw the business differently. It was my creation born from sleepless nights and relentless hustle, but also my cage. Every dollar I earned went to Daniel's typewriter ribbons, Ellie's art supplies, and our mortgage. I'd wanted to design clothes to see my sketches come to life, but duty always came first. The 1980s were changing, that women were launching brands, breaking into fashion's elite circles. I'd read about Betsy Johnson's bold designs in Vogue, her stores popping up in New York. If she could do it, why not me? Selling the business meant letting go of my past identity and freedom to chase what I'd buried. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. The radio played Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, its raw energy mirroring the pulse in my veins. I thought of Daniel and Ellie in the backyard, lost in the myth of the river stone. I'd seen it again this morning, Daniel passing it to Ellie as he wove another tale about Ava. I'd ignored it in my past life, telling myself it was just nostalgia. But after his death, I'd found Ava's letters, each a dagger. They spanned our entire marriage, 40 years of his heart belonging to her. Ellie's name, Ellie, short for Ava, plus family, was a secret tribute, a betrayal I'd carried unknowingly every time I called her. I signed the contract, writing "deal closed" in bold strokes. The act felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind the Sarah who lived for others. I imagined New York, its skyline a beacon of possibility. The city was alive with ambition. Wall Street's boom, fashions rise, women carving out spaces where they'd once been sidelined. I could start small work for a designer and learn the trade I'd only dreamed of. The money from the sale would give me a cushion, a chance to live for myself. As I folded the contract, Ellie's voice echoed from the yard. "Dad, would you be with Ava if you hadn't married Mom?" My breath caught. She was 9, yet already steeped in Daniel's romanticism. I stepped to the doorway, watching them. Daniel covered her mouth gently. "Hush, Ellie. Your mom might hear. She wouldn't understand." Ellie grinned, unfazed. "It's okay, Dad. Mom's just good at business stuff. She's not like us." The words hit like a slap, sharper for their innocence. Ellie didn't see me as her mother, but as a function, a provider, not a person with dreams. In my past life, she'd grown into the teenager who'd published Daniel and Ava's story, reading comments that pitied her father's tragic marriage to me as I lay dying. I searched her face, now wondering if she felt torn. Did she love me, or was I just the woman who paid for her crayons? Her adoration for Daniel was clear, but I saw a flicker of something else, maybe a need for approval, a child caught between her father's ideals and the reality I provided. I wanted to shake her, to tell her I was more than a ledger, that I'd once dreamed of dresses that could make hearts race. But I held back. She was a product of our world, Daniel's stories, my absence, the 1980s culture that still told girls to idolize men's dreams over their mothers' sacrifices. Women like me were expected to be the backbone, not the star. I'd enabled that, working late while Daniel played the hero no more. I slipped the contract into an envelope and headed to the post office. The streets of Dayton buzzed with life kids on bikes, women in shoulder pads, heading to office jobs, signs of a world shifting. I passed a newsstand, headlines shouting about women's rights and economic booms. I felt part of it, a woman stepping out of the shadows. Daniel could keep his stone, his poetry, his Ava. Ellie could chase his dreams. I'd build my own in a city where ambition was currency. Back home, I packed a small bag, my sketches tucked inside. The sale will finalize in a week, which is enough time to plan my move to New York. Daniel and Ellie didn't notice my resolve, still lost in their backyard tales. I looked at them one last time, the weight of 2 lifetimes settling. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving a role I'd never chosen. The future was mine, and I'd stitch it together, one bold design at a time. The summer air in Dayton, Ohio carried the scent of cut grass and the distant hum of 1982's pop anthems drifting from car radios. I stood in the doorway of our modest home on Maple Street, the contract to sell my textile business mailed off its promise of freedom, a quiet fire in my chest. Daniel and 9-year-old Ellie sat cross-legged in the backyard on a faded blanket, the heart-shaped river stone passing between them as he spun another tale of poetic love. The stone, a gift from Ava, his college sweetheart, was no longer just a relic to me, a symbol of a betrayal that spanned 2 lifetimes. I'd ignored it in my past life, believing it a harmless echo of youth. But Daniel's dying whispers of Ava's name clutching that stone had shattered that illusion. Now reborn, I saw it for what it was, proof that his heart had never been mine. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles whitening. The 1980s were a time of upheaval. In America, women were pushing against the glass ceiling, their shoulder pads as bold as their ambitions. I'd read about women like Diane von Furstenberg turning fashion into power and felt a pull to join them. My textile business had been my pride, built from a single sewing machine into a factory that clothed half of Dayton. But it had also been my cage, chaining me to Daniel's unprofitable poetry and Ellie's art classes. Selling it was my first act of rebellion, a step toward a life where I could design, not just manage. Yet the weight of 40 years lingered, years of being unseen, my dreams buried under their needs. Ellie's voice broke through, sharp and unguarded. "Dad, would you be with Ava if you hadn't married Mom instead?" My breath caught the words, slicing through the warm afternoon. She was only 9, her dark curls bouncing as she leaned toward Daniel. Still, her question carried the weight of her future self, the teenager who'd published Daniel and Ava's love story, dismissing me as the practical wife who benefited from their tragedy. I waited heart-pounding for Daniel's response. He glanced toward the house, his eyes skimming past me, and whispered, "Let's keep that quiet, Ellie. Your mom wouldn't get it." Ellie giggled, clutching the stone. "It's fine, Dad. Mom's just good at numbers and stuff. She doesn't understand romance like we do." The words stung, not just for their cruelty, but for their truth. To Ellie, I was the woman who paid the bills, not the one who'd once sketched dresses by lamplight, dreaming of runways. I searched her face for a crack in her certainty, a hint of the girl who might need me. Was she parroting Daniel, raised on his stories of star-crossed love? Or did she feel caught, torn between his idealism and the stability I provided? In my past life, she'd chosen his side, reading those internet comments as I lay dying, her voice bright with admiration for his sacrifice. But now at 9, there was a flicker of something, maybe uncertainty, a child's need for a mother she didn't yet know how to love. I stepped back into the kitchen, my resolve hardening. The 1980s were rewriting what it meant to be a woman. I'd seen it in the news, women running for office, launching startups, demanding equal pay. In Dayton, though, tradition lingered like dust in the corners. Wives were still expected to be the backbone, their dreams secondary to their husbands' and children's. I'd lived that role, funding Daniel's poetry while my sketches gathered dust. In my past life, I'd found Ava's letters after his death, 40 years of love notes hidden in his desk, each a reminder that our marriage was a compromise for him. Ellie's name, a blend of Ava and family, was a secret he'd carried, a betrayal I'd unknowingly voiced every day. I slipped one of those letters, imagined from my past life's discovery, into my pocket, a talisman of my decision. I headed to the post office, the streets alive with the pulse of a changing America. Kids rode bikes, their laughter mingling with the roar of muscle cars. A billboard advertised a women's career fair, its slogan, "Bold your future, your choice." I felt it speaking to me. I'd given 40 years to a family that saw me as a means, not a person. Daniel could keep his poetry in stone. Ellie could chase his dreams. I was done being their anchor. At the post office, I mailed the contract, my hands steady. The sale would finalize in a week, giving me time to plan my move to New York, where fashion was a battlefield and women like me could fight for a place. I thought of my sketches tucked in a suitcase with designs that could rival Vogue's bold prints. The betrayal still burned, Daniel's secret love, Ellie's dismissal, but it fueled me now. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving a life that had erased me. As I walked home, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. I was Sarah, 30, and reborn, ready to stitch my story in a world that was finally listening. The morning light spilled across our Dayton kitchen, glinting off the coffee pot as I packed my sketches into a worn suitcase. The textile business sale was underway, its proceeds my ticket to New York, where I'd chase the dream of designing clothes, not just producing them. The radio blared Joan Jett's "I Love Rock and Roll," its defiance echoing mine. In 1982, America was electric with change. Women were launching boutiques, breaking into boardrooms, their voices amplified by a decade of feminist gains. I'd spent my past life tethered to Dayton's expectations, a wife and mother first, my ambitions a distant second. Now reborn, I was ready to join the tide of women rewriting their futures. Daniel's voice broke through from the living room, bright with an energy I hadn't heard in years. Sarah, make something special for lunch today. Use the good china and get some steak from the butcher. I froze my hand on a sketch of a silk dress. He paced the room, his eyes alight, hands clapping with excitement. Ava's coming, he said, as if it were the most natural thing. I invited her to visit, she replied this morning. Ellie poked her head in her 9-year-old face, glowing. Ava's gonna love it here, Dad. I can't wait to meet her. My stomach twisted, a cold unease creeping in. Ava Daniels' college sweetheart, the woman whose name he'd whispered on his deathbed, whose heart-shaped riverstone he'd clutched. In my past life, I'd never met her. She was a ghost in his letters, a shadow over our marriage. Why was she here now? I studied Daniel, his boyish grin, at odds with his 32 years. Was he reborn too, seizing a chance to rewrite his story with Ava? The thought chilled me, but it also sharpened my focus. He was mistaken if he thought I'd play the dutiful wife catering to his lost love. I set the suitcase down, my voice steady. Who's Ava to you, Daniel, and what am I? He blinked, caught off guard, his grin fading. She's just a friend, Sarah. She's visiting for a few days. You can share the meal, can't you? His tone was dismissive, as if my role was to serve, not to feel. Ellie chimed in, her voice innocent but cutting. Mom, don't be weird. Ava's incredible, like Dad's stories. You're always busy with work stuff anyway. Her words echoed the future I'd lived, her teenage self praising Daniel and Ava's tragic love while I lay dying, dismissed as the practical one. I looked at Ellie, searching for the girl beneath her father's influence. She clung to Daniel's ideals, raised on his tales of romance, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a need for something more. Maybe a mother's love she didn't know how to ask for. I'd been too busy to notice in my past life, working late to fund her dreams while Daniel filled her head with poetry. Now I saw her caught between his world and mine, a child shaped by a culture that glorified men's dreams over women's labor. The 1980s were challenging, with women like Sandra Day O'Connor on the Supreme Court proving we could be more. I wanted Ellie to see that, but first I had to see it myself. Daniel, I said, my voice sharp, do you even know what I like to eat? What do I dream about? He froze, his hand stilling. Sarah, you're making this bigger than it is. It's just lunch. His evasion was answer enough. In our past life, he'd never cooked a meal, never asked about my sketches. He'd lived comfortably off my labor writing poems that never sold while I kept us afloat. Now he expected me to welcome Ava to play the perfect hostess in a world that was starting to value women's voices. I turned away, grabbing my purse. I'm not your maid, I said, heading for the door. Ellie called after me. Mom, why are you mad? Ava's nice. Her voice trembled, and I paused, glancing back. Was she confused? Torn between her father's charm and my anger, I wanted to tell her I was fighting for myself, the woman she might one day become, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I walked out the summer heat wrapping around me like a promise. I drove to the butcher, not for Daniel's steak, but to clear my head. Dayton's streets buzzed with life women in power suits, billboards touting career seminars for today's woman. I felt part of it, a spark of the ambition that fueled New York's fashion scene. The sale would give me enough to start over, learn design, and be more than the wife who paid for Daniel's dreams. Ava's arrival was a test, a chance to prove I wouldn't bend. Daniel could have his poetry, Ellie her stories, but I was done serving their ideals. My sketches and future waited in New York, and I'd get there one bold step at a time. The Dayton sun hung low, painting the sky in hues of amber as I stood in our kitchen, my suitcase packed with sketches and essentials. The textile business sale was nearly complete, and its proceeds are a lifeline to a new beginning in New York. The radio blared the Go-Go's We Got the Beat, its rhythm pulsing through me like a call to action. In 1982, America was alive with women breaking molds. Anita Hill was challenging workplace norms, and fashion icons like Norma Kamali were redefining style. I'd spent my past life as Dayton's dutiful wife, my textile business funding Daniel's poetry and Ellie's dreams while my sketches languished. Now reborn, I was ready to join the wave of women claiming their futures. Daniel's voice interrupted my thoughts, frantic, from the living room. Sarah, you're back. Good. Ava's arriving soon. Make sure lunch is ready. He paced, his excitement palpable, as if Ava's visit was grand. Ellie bounced beside him, clutching the heart-shaped river stone, her eyes bright. Mom, Ava's gonna love our house. In my past life, Ava never visited, existing only in Daniel's letters and dying whispers. Her presence now felt like a challenge, a test of my resolve. Was Daniel reborn too, rewriting his story to include her? The thought tightened my chest, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't the Sarah who'd cater to his fantasies. I set my suitcase by the door, my voice firm. I'm not cooking for Ava Daniel. I'm done playing your servant. He froze, his brow furrowing. It's just lunch, Sarah. She's traveled far. Don't be unreasonable. Ellie chimed in, her tone half pleading, half accusing. Mom, why are you being mean, Ava's dad's friend? Her words echoed her future self, the teenager who'd romanticized Daniel and Ava's love while dismissing me as I lay dying. I searched her face for a crack in her loyalty, a hint of the girl who might need me. Was she parroting Daniel, or torn between his charm and my sacrifices? Her eyes flickered uncertainly, but it wasn't enough to sway me. I turned to Daniel. You've never once asked what I want, what I dream of. Do you even know me? He stammered. You're my wife, Sarah. You've got the business in the house. What more do you need? His words mirror our past life, where he'd lived off my labor writing unsold poems while I kept us afloat. The 1980s changed that narrative. Women demanded more, from equal pay to creative control. I'd read about women like Liz Claiborne building fashion empires. I wanted that, not a life serving a man who loved another. I grabbed my purse and headed out, the sale's final papers due at the lawyer's office. The streets of Dayton buzzed with life women in bold blazers, billboards touting career workshops. I felt part of it, a woman stepping into her own. At the lawyer's, I signed the last documents, the $200,000 check and a promise of freedom. Back home, I avoided Daniel and Ellie, their preparations for Ava, a distant hum. That evening, Daniel's voice rang out. Sarah, we're going to Luigi's for dinner with Ava. Join us if you want. I didn't. At Luigi's, Daniel's attempt to impress Ava unraveled. He'd ordered an expensive bottle of Bordeaux, expecting me to cover it as always. When the bill came, he fumbled, his wallet empty. Ellie ran to me as I arrived, tugged by a neighbor's call. Mom, pay it, Dad's short. The restaurant was crowded, diners whispering as Daniel's face reddened. I stood tall, my voice clear. I've carried this family for years, Daniel. Your poetry doesn't pay for wine. I turned to the owner. Please put it on a tab. Let him handle it. Desperate to save face, Daniel pulled off our wedding ring, our only heirloom from his cash-strapped family, and placed it on the table. Collateral, he muttered. The ring glinted under the restaurant lights, symbolizing vows he'd never honored. I'd cherished it in my past life, believing it tied us together. Now it was just metal pawned for his pride. I walked out, the whispers of what kind of man lets his wife carry everything trailing behind. At home, I bought a bus ticket to New York, the city's fashion scene calling me. The sale money would fund my start, maybe a job at a design house, a chance to turn my sketches into reality. Ellie's voice echoed in my mind, dismissing me as good at business. I saw her struggle. She was raised to idolize Daniel, but was dependent on me. I wanted to save her, but I had to save myself first. As I packed, the radio played Pat Benatar's Hit Me With Your Best Shot, its Defiance my anthem. I wasn't just leaving Daniel and Ellie. I was leaving a world that expected women to sacrifice. New York waited, a city where I could be Sarah the designer, not Sarah the provider. The heart-shaped stone could keep Daniel's dreams. I was breaking free to chase mine. The New York City skyline loomed through the bus window, its towers gleaming under the 1982 sun like a promise of reinvention. I, Sarah Thompson, clutched my suitcase, my sketches tucked inside as the Greyhound rolled into Port Authority. The textile business sale had left me with $200,000, enough to rent a small apartment in Brooklyn and start anew. In Dayton, I'd been the wife who paid the bills, my dreams buried under Daniel's poetry and Ellie's needs. Now reborn, I was in the heart of America's fashion capital, where women like Donna Karan and Betsy Johnson were turning fabric into art. The 1980s were a battleground for ambition, and I was ready to fight for my place. I found a job at a garment district factory, and my past life experience landed me a role sorting patterns. The hum of sewing machines was familiar, but it felt like a rhythm of possibility here. I rented a cramped studio, its walls bare, but for my pinned-up sketches, dresses with bold lines inspired by the neon energy of New York streets. The city pulsed with life, women in power suits striding down Fifth Avenue clubs, blasting blondie billboards touting women's career expos. I felt alive, part of a world where women were rewriting the rules. In Dayton, I'd been invisible, my labor taken for granted. Here I could be seen. My first weeks were a whirlwind. I worked long hours learning the industry's pace, but at night I sketched my pencil, dancing across pages with designs I'd never dared show in Dayton. One evening, as I pinned a sketch to my wall, my coworker Lisa, a lively 20-something with a teased perm, knocked on my door. "Sarah, you're up for supervisor," she said, grinning. "The boss loves your eye for detail." I smiled, a warmth spreading through me. My skills had kept a family afloat in my past life, but never earned me praise. Now they were my ticket to more, maybe a design course, a chance to create. I thought of Daniel and Ellie, who were left behind in Dayton. In my past life, I died knowing Daniel loved Ava, his heart-shaped stone, a symbol of his betrayal. Ellie had echoed his romanticism, publishing their story while dismissing me. Now I wondered about her. At 9, she was caught in Daniel's spell, but I'd seen flickers of doubt in her eyes, a need for the mother she barely knew. I'd been too busy in my past life working late to fund her art classes to nurture that bond. Could I have reached her? The thought lingered, but I pushed it away. My focus was now in a city where I could be more than a provider. One afternoon, as I sorted fabric swatches, Lisa invited me to a women's networking event. "It's at a loft in Soho," she said. "Designers, buyers, all women making waves." I hesitated, my Dayton self whispering I didn't belong. But the 1980s were about bold moves. Women launched startups and challenged norms. I went wearing a dress I'd sewn from one of my sketches, its clean lines drawing eyes. At the event, I met women like me, ambitious and unafraid, swapping stories of breaking into male-dominated fields. One designer, Maria, studied my dress. "You made this. You've got talent. Get to a design school." Her words lit a spark. I wasn't just a factory worker. I was a creator. Back at my apartment, I pinned Maria's card to my wall next to my sketches. New York was tough, rent was steep, the pace relentless, but it was also vibrant, full of possibility. I thought of Ava, whose arrival had pushed me to leave Dayton. She'd been a ghost in my past life, existing only in Daniel's letters. Now she was real, a catalyst for my escape. I wondered why she'd come. Had Daniel promised her a life I'd funded? I didn't care. She could have him, his poetry, his stone. I was building something new. As I walked to work, the city's energy wrapped around me. Street vendors hawked hot dogs, taxis honked, and women in bold prints strode with purpose. I felt part of it, a woman reborn, not just by fate, but by choice. My sketches were my future, each line a step away from the Sarah who'd lived for others. In Dayton, I'd been invisible. I was beginning to shine in New York, and no one, not Daniel, Ellie, or Ava, could dim that light. The New York City air buzzed with ambition, its streets a symphony of honking taxis and clacking heels under the 1982 autumn sky. I, Sarah Thompson, had carved out a new life in Brooklyn, my small apartment a sanctuary of sketches and dreams. The $200,000 from selling my Dayton textile business funded my start, and my job at a garment district factory had grown into a supervisor role. The hum of sewing machines was my rhythm, each stitch a step toward becoming a designer. The 1980s were a crucible for women. Anita Hill's testimony sparked debates, and designers like Donna Karan proved women could shape industries. I felt part of that tide, no longer the invisible wife who funded Daniel's poetry and Ellie's dreams. Once confined to margins, my sketches now fill notebooks, their bold lines inspired by New York's neon pulse. At a women's networking event in Soho, a designer praised my work and urged me to pursue formal training. I'd pinned her card to my wall, a beacon of possibility. In Dayton, I'd been the backbone, my labor unseen by Daniel, who clung to Ava's heart-shaped riverstone, and Ellie, who echoed his romanticism. In my past life, their betrayal, his secret letters, her dismissal of me as I lay dying, had broken me. Now reborn, I was building a life where I shone. One crisp October morning, a shadow fell across my workstation as I sorted fabric swatches at the factory. I looked up to see Daniel, his face, haggard eyes, bloodshot clothes, rumpled like he'd slept in them. "Sarah," he rasped, "come home. Everything's falling apart." His hands, scraped and bruised, trembled as he reached for me. "I searched every factory in New York to find you." My heart thudded, not with pity, but with the weight of 2 lifetimes. He'd lived off my labor in my past life, writing unsold poems while I kept us afloat. Now he stood before me, a man unmoored, expecting me to save him again. I stepped back, shaking off his grip. "You have your poetry, Daniel. And Ava. Why do you need me?" His eyes darkened, a mix of shame and defiance. Inspiration doesn't pay the bills, Sarah. I can't write when I'm hungry. Ellie needs you too. His mention of Ellie stung. At 9, she was caught in his spell, raised on his tales of Ava's love, but I'd seen flickers of doubt in her, a child needing a mother she didn't know how to love. In my past life, she'd published their story, praising their tragic love, as I died blind to my sacrifices. Now I wondered if she felt torn dependent on me, yet loyal to him. Ellie can stay with Ava, I said coldly. You three are a family now, aren't you? His fists clenched, his posture stiff like the scholar he fancied himself. You've changed, Sarah. You were practical and supportive. We weren't a perfect match, but I married you. You didn't lose out. His words echoed the 1980s lingering sexism men expected women to serve their dreams secondary. I'd read about women fighting this from Gloria Steinem to women in Congress demanding equality. I was done being the dutiful wife. You married me because Ava wouldn't have you, I shot back. She didn't want a broke poet. His face paled, the truth ablaid. He'd lived comfortably off my business in my past life, deluded into thinking he was self-sufficient. Now he stood exposed, his pride crumbling. What about Ellie, he pleaded. Are you abandoning her? I thought of her raised to idolize him, but tied to my labor. I wanted to save her, to show her a woman could be more, but I had to save myself first. Go back to Dayton, I said, turning away. Find work. The world's changing, men like you can't just dream anymore. He stood frozen, his hands empty without his stone. I walked back to my swatches, the factory's hum grounding me. New York was my home now, and its energy is fueling my sketches. I thought of Ava, whose arrival had pushed me to leave. Had she come seeking Daniel's promises only to find his empty wallet, I didn't care. My future was here in a city where women were rewriting their stories. I was Sarah, no longer a wife or mother first, but a woman with dreams as bold as the skyline. As I left work, the city sparkled its lights, a canvas for my ambitions. I'd enroll in design school and turn my sketches into reality. Daniel's desperation was his own. I wouldn't carry it. The 1980s were my time, and I'd seize it one design at a time. The New York winter of 1982 wrapped the garment district in a chill, but the heat of ambition kept me warm inside the factory. Sarah Thompson had found my place among the clatter of sewing machines, my supervisor role a stepping stone to bigger dreams. My Brooklyn apartment was a gallery of sketches, each dress a piece of the designer I was becoming. The 1980s were a revolution for women. Sandra Day O'Connor sat on the Supreme Court, and designers like Betsy Johnson turned fashion into power. I felt their energy, a far cry from the Dayton wife who'd funded Daniel's poetry and Ellie's dreams, only to be betrayed by his love for Ava and her dismissal of me. My days were filled with work and night classes at a design school funded by the textile business sale. My sketches were earning praise, my professor calling them bold with a voice. I was no longer the invisible Sarah laboring for others. But Daniel's shadow lingered. I'd sent him back to Dayton, his plea for me to return unanswered, but rumors reached me through coworkers with Ohio ties. Daniel and Ava were struggling, their romantic ideals crumbling under unpaid bills. Ellie, caught in their world, was suffering too. I wondered about her. Did she miss me, or was she still lost in Daniel's stories of Ava's heart-shaped stone? One morning, as I reviewed patterns, my boss Tom called me into his office. Sarah, you look distracted, he said, his eyes kind but sharp. I hesitated, then spilled the truth. Daniel's visit, his expectation that I'd return to save them. Tom leaned back, a smile playing on his lips. You know, the marriage laws have changed. New York passed no-fault divorce in 1980. If the emotional bond is broken, you can walk away. I stared, stunned. In my past life, divorce had seemed impossible, a shameful hurdle Ellie had dismissed as too hard when I'd asked her as a teenager. I'd stayed, my black hair turning white, my dreams fading with time. Tom explained the process: mediation, a judge's approval, and freedom. You've got a life here, Sarah, he said. Don't let him drag you back. His words echoed the 1980s feminist surge. Women were claiming autonomy from boardrooms to courtrooms. I'd read about divorce rates rising as women demanded more. I wanted that freedom to shed the wife who'd carried Daniel's dreams while he wrote to Ava, his letters a 40-year betrayal I'd found after his death. Ellie's name, a tribute to Ava, had been a daily wound, her future self praising their love as I died. I filed for divorce, my hands trembling as I signed the papers. The mediation office was stark, its fluorescent lights harsh. Daniel arrived, his face, gaunt eyes, bloodshot. Sarah, you can't do this, he rasped. Ellie's only 9. Are you abandoning us? His voice carried the old entitlement, the poet who thought his dreams excused his failures. I met his gaze calm. I'll send child support for Ellie at a minimum. The rest is on you. He grabbed my arm, desperate. What about me? How do I live without you? Tom, who'd come to support me, stepped in. You've got hands, Daniel. Use them. Or are you just a freeloader? Daniel's face twisted, his scholarly pride stung. He snapped that my hands are for poetry books, not manual labor. Tom laughed. The college entrance exams opened up years ago. Didn't pass, huh? Guess freeloading's your only talent. Daniel lunged, shouting, You've poisoned Sarah. She was fine in Dayton, taking care of us. I slapped his hand away, my voice steel. You were useless then, Daniel, and you're worthless now. The mediator intervened, pulling Daniel back as he ranted about traditional values and his right to keep me. If I disagree, how can she leave? He yelled. But the law was clear. Our bond was broken. My heart long since turned from him. The judge handed me a green booklet, the divorce decree, its weight like a second rebirth. I was free, legally untethered from the man who'd loved Ava through 40 years of our marriage, whose stone had meant more than our vows. Outside the city sparkled its cold air, sharp with promise. I thought of Ellie caught in Daniel's world, but tied to my sacrifices. I'd send her support, but I couldn't save her from his choices. I learned Ava had left Dayton disillusioned by Daniel's empty promises, taking their last valuables. Her exit was a quiet justice. She'd chased a poet's dream and found only debt. I walked back to the factory, my sketches waiting. The 1980s were my canvas, and I'd paint it with designs that spoke my name, not his. The New York City winter of 1983 glittered with possibility, its skyline a jagged promise against the frosty sky. Sarah Thompson had carved a niche in the garment district, my supervisor role at the factory, blossoming into a creative outlet. My Brooklyn apartment was a canvas of sketches, dresses with daring cuts inspired by the 1980s bold aesthetic from Madonna's lace to Diane von Furstenberg's wraps. The $200,000 from selling my Dayton textile business had given me freedom, and night classes at a design school were honing my craft. My professor had called my latest design a statement, fierce and feminine words that lit a fire in me. In Dayton, I'd been the invisible wife funding Daniel's poetry and Ellie's dreams, while my own languished. Now reborn, I was part of a revolution. Women like Geraldine Ferraro were running for office, and designers like Norma Kamali were redefining fashion. I was no longer Sarah the provider, but Sarah the creator. My boss Tom had become a mentor, and his belief in me starkly contrasted with Daniel's dismissal. One snowy afternoon, as I reviewed a pattern, he called me into his office. Sarah, those sketches of yours, they're special, he said, pulling out my latest, a silk dress with angular shoulders. I'm paying you to attend Parsons School of Design full-time. Women like you need to be seen, not stuck in a factory. His words hit like a thunderbolt. In my past life, I'd buried my dreams, my sketches hidden under ledgers, while I supported Daniel's unsold poems and Ellie's art classes. Now a door was opening, one I'd never dared imagine. I nodded, my voice catching. I'm in Tom, thank you. I thought of Daniel and Ellie, who were left behind in Dayton. Word had reached me through coworkers with Ohio ties. Daniel's romantic ideals had crumbled under reality's weight. Ava, his college sweetheart, had come to Dayton chasing his promises of a grand life drawn by letters boasting of a factory and savings. My factory, my savings. But when she arrived, she found a poet with no income, his heart-shaped riverstone no match for unpaid bills. Disillusioned, Ava had fled after a few weeks, taking their last valuables, a silver candlestick, a radio, leaving Daniel and Ellie in a cramped apartment. Her exit was a quiet justice. She'd sought a dream and found a mirage. I felt no pity, only relief. Ava had been the ghost in my past life, her letters a 40-year betrayal hidden in Daniel's desk. She was gone, and her role in my story had ended. Ellie haunted me more. At 9, she was caught in Daniel's spell, raised on his tales of Ava's love. But I'd seen flickers of doubt in her eyes, a child needing a mother she didn't know how to reach. In my past life, she'd grown into the teenager who published Daniel and Ava's story, praising their tragic love as I lay dying, dismissing my sacrifices. I wondered if she felt my absence now, torn between his ideals and the stability I'd provided. I sent child support, the minimum required, but I couldn't save her from his choices. I'd tried in my past life, working late to fund her dreams only to be erased. Now I had to choose myself. At Parsons, I thrived my designs, earning nods from professors and peers. I sketched late into the night, my apartment glowing with lamplight and ambition. The 1980s were a crucible for women feminist rallies filled the streets, and women's magazines touted having it all. I felt part of it, my sketches, a rebellion against Dayton's expectations where wives were meant to serve. One evening at a student showcase, a boutique owner approached me. "Your dress," she said, pointing to my asymmetrical gown, "is fresh. Can you make 10 by next month?" I nodded, stunned. My designs were no longer dreams, they were becoming reality. The city's neon lights danced as I walked home, reflecting my spark. I thought of Daniel, his pride shattered by Ava's departure and financial ruin. He'd pawned our old house to cover debts, his scholarly facade crumbling. I learned Ellie was struggling in school, her adoration for Daniel tested by hunger and instability. I wanted to reach her to show her a woman could be more than a man's shadow, but I'd learned a hard truth: you can't save someone who doesn't see you. My future was here in New York's chaos, where my designs would speak louder than Daniel's poems ever did. The spring of 1985 bathed New York City in a golden glow, its streets alive with the pulse of ambition and reinvention. Sarah Thompson, had transformed from a Dayton wife into a rising designer. My dresses now sold in Soho boutiques, their bold lines echoing the 1980s fearless spirit. My Parsons training, funded by Tom, had polished my skills, and my latest collection, silk gowns with geometric cuts, had earned a write-up in Women's Wear Daily. The girl who'd once sketched in the margins of ledgers was now a name, my creations worn by women striding into boardrooms and nightclubs. The decade was a beacon for women. Hillary Clinton was making waves in law, and designers like Diane von Furstenberg were icons of power. I was part of that tide, no longer defined by Daniel's poetry or Ellie's needs. I returned to Dayton to finalize my household registration, a final tie to my past life. The town felt smaller, and its quiet streets contrasted with New York's roar. Neighbors greeted me, their eyes wide at my tailored coat and Hermes bag, a far cry from the Sarah who'd left in 1982. They shared gossip over coffee at the diner. Daniel and Ava had crumbled under reality's weight. Lured by Daniel's letters boasting wealth, Ava had arrived expecting a comfortable life. Instead, she found a poet without income whose promises were built on my textile business. After weeks of unpaid bills and Daniel's refusal to work, she'd fled, taking their last valuables, a watch, a lamp, back to her own struggling life. Her departure was a quiet end to the myth of their love, the heart-shaped riverstone, no match for survival's demands. I learned Daniel had pawned our old house to cover Ava's debts, leaving him and Ellie in a rundown apartment. His scholarly pride, once his shield was gone, his poetry unpublished, his dreams buried under necessity. Ellie, now 11, was struggling, her grades slipping as she chased her father's ideals in a world that demanded more. I thought of her caught between his stories and the reality I'd once shielded her from. In my past life, she'd grown into the teenager who published their story, dismissing me as I died. I saw her complexity, a girl raised to idolize Daniel, but aching for stability, too young to bridge that gap. I sent child support, but I couldn't save her from his choices. As I walked Dayton's muddy paths, a hunched figure caught my eye, stumbling through a field with a tattered bag. It was Daniel, his hair graying and muttering. My family were scholars. I'm meant for greatness. In his bag, heart-shaped stones clinked, relics of a dream that had broken him. Ellie trailed behind, a spatula in hand, calling Dad, "Eat." Her voice was weary, her eyes tired. A world crushed the poet I'd once loved. He'd refused to join. The 1980s demanded adaptability. Men and women alike were finding jobs, building futures, but Daniel clung to a past that no longer existed. Ellie spotted me, her eyes widening. "Mom," she cried, running toward me, "please take me with you. I want the city too." Her hair was greasy, her clothes worn, but her gaze held a desperate spark. I saw her struggle, raised on Daniel's tales, yet craving the life I'd built. In my past life, I'd worked until dawn to fund her dreams, only to be erased. She reached for me, but I stepped back, my heart heavy. "Go back to your father," I said, climbing into my rental truck. "You chose his world." Her tears fell, but I'd learned I couldn't live for others. The truck rumbled away, Dayton fading in the rearview mirror. New York waited. It's the skyline of my Roman road. My designs were gaining traction, and a boutique ordered my following collection. I thought of Ava, whose brief role in my story ended, and Daniel, a shadow of his former self. Ellie's plea lingered, but I'd given enough. The 1980s were my time, a decade where women like me could rise. I clutched my sketchbook, its pages full of dreams no longer buried. As the sun set, casting gold across the highway, I was Sarah reborn and free living for myself at last.